Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, please welcome Bernadette Joy, author of the book, Crush Your Money Goals, 25 Smart Money Habits to Save, Invest, and Fast Track Your Financial Freedom. Bernadette, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. And it's quite interesting to find that you are Filipino,
hmm
and because my girlfriend is also from the Philippines. And
Oh,
and so good to make that connection. I'm actually going to be there in a couple weeks to visit that great country. So looking forward to that. So let's talk about your background first. How did you get to where you're at right now?
sure. Well, first generation Filipino American. My parents were both born in the Philippines and immigrated to the US. I grew up in New York City. Fast forward to about 10 years ago, my husband and I decided to move to Charlotte, North Carolina, to escape the high cost of living in New York City. And that is what started the trajectory of, okay, what can life look like if I don't actually follow the quote unquote American dream? If I leave the stable corporate job that my parents said was the ticket to freedom, if I actually tried to start doing entrepreneurship, if I pursued financial freedom and specifically debt freedom, what would my life look like? And really, what started this whole journey for me was that back then I was actually clinically diagnosed with anxiety and depression at certain times, and I realized that a lot of it had to do with focusing on capitalism and trying to keep up with the Joneses. And so I started pursuing financial independence, starting out with learning how to pay down debt quickly, specifically student loans that a lot of Americans deal with. And then fast forward to now, my husband and I, we have a joint net worth of about $1.8 million, and I am turning 40 next year and planning to go into at least semi-retirement.
Well, congratulations. I know you were talking to me about countries that you might consider moving to, and Vietnam being one of those countries that you're considering. So, what made you decide that you wanted to be? I mean, of course, everybody wants to be debt free, but it's usually something incredibly hard to obtain. And how did you manage to put together a pretty nice portfolio of almost $2 million at a relatively young age?
Well, I had this thought one day. There's all of this talk in the millennial kind of space around side hustles that it's very hard to just get by on one income. And so a lot of people were doing side hustles, whether it's Uber or at the time I was selling jewelry. My husband and I were extras on TV. We were doing all these different side hustles to pay down debt. And one day it occurred to me, I had this thought. I woke up and I said, oh my God, my debt is someone else's passive income. They did pretty much no work for me to pay them, you know, potentially tens of thousands of dollars, whether it was my student loans or my credit cards or my car payment or even my mortgage. And I decided that day that I didn't want to be someone else's passive income. And so, where I decided to focus on within my financial journey was just to pay down debt. And specifically, I had $72,000 of student loans, from which I got from my master's degree. And my husband started an aggressive plan, and for me and my husband and I, we started an aggressive plan to pay off the $72,000 in 2 years, with the thought that once we finished that debt, that I could go into entrepreneurship.
And then that was the next step for you.
Yeah, so $72,000. The way that I had kind of reversed into it was I didn't feel comfortable. I consider myself to be a relatively risk averse person. And I decided that I did not feel comfortable in going into a business after being in corporate for so many years until I at least had paid off those student loans. So the way that I thought about it was that I reverse engineered. I said, okay, if I want to pay off these $72,000 in 2 years, that's about $36,000 a year. That's a lot of money for the vast majority of people to just focus on just that. And so that was about $3,000 a month. And we did all the combination of all the side hustles and really skinnying down our expenses and really focusing on spending intentionally. And then once we had paid off those student loans, I had jumped full time into my then business. And I've been an entrepreneur now since 2016.
Tell us about some of your entrepreneurial ventures.
So my first real, I would say, quote unquote, real entrepreneurial venture was actually a business that was born out of my own necessity. It was a company called Dressed, and I actually rented out dresses for special occasions. Since your girlfriend is Filipino, she'll know that Filipinos, we like to dress up a lot for special occasions, and we can't be seen wearing the same thing sometimes. And so I started this dress rental business, and I learned so much about operations and marketing and customer service in that business. And I ran it for 3 years, and I think it was kismet that 2019 I decided to pivot away from that business and move into what I do now, which is financial coaching and education. Because what ended up happening in 2020 was that my business would have been shut down then anyway, because there were no parties, there was nowhere for people to go back then. And so since 2020, I've been then running Crush Your Money Goals, which has several lines of income, which includes some of the journalism work that I do, the book, which is also another line of income, but I do a lot of financial coaching, both for entrepreneurs and for individuals who want to become financially free.
So let's start with your book. On chapter 1, Practicing Skills, you mentioned that achieving financial independence takes practice and that your book can serve as a tool in this journey. Can you elaborate on specific practices or exercises that readers can engage in to develop their financial skills more effectively? And by the way, this is a huge, huge thing here in Asia, financial literacy. I mean, they're really just starting to get into it. So your book should
Yes.
really resonate well here.
Yes, I'm very excited. I just mentioned to you earlier that someone sent me a picture of the book in a bookstore in the Philippines, and that made me really happy. And so, one of the ways that I purposefully made this a tool, not just something that you passively read along, is that at the end of each of the habits, there's 25 specific habits. And what I found when I did my research on other financial literacy or financial management books was that there was a lot of transferring of knowledge, but not really specific how to's on specific habits that people really need to do. And so I tell people that this is not the book of the things you need to know, it's the book of the things you need to do. And purposefully, we narrowed it down to 25 things that I think most people can at least have a smaller list to start from instead of the overwhelm. And the way that we've created it as a tool is at the end of each of these habits, there are specific questions for people to reflect upon and to actually write down their notes along the way. And so I hope that anyone who reads the book will actively journal along while they're reading and to be able to track their progress along the time that they spend reading the book.
And that's what you use as a journal to track your expenses?
Yes. So I use I use budgeting tools, and I talk about them in the book. There's two tools that I mentioned specifically. There is Monarch Money, and then there is Every Dollar. And even though it's Every Dollar, you can really use it in any currency. It just might have the dollar sign in front of it. But I always have a journal alongside my book with me. And even today, right before I got on this podcast, I was at my local salt cave. That's my new thing, to go hide in a salt cave. And I was journaling the things that I wanted to do and accomplish within my financial goals for 2025. And I think it's really important for people to actually write down and brain dump what is going on in their head, because what I found from coaching hundreds of people is that the overwhelm comes from trying to store everything in our brains. And as a psychology degree, my psychology degree taught me that actually our brain is terrible for storage. It's used for processing. So the more that you're able to store these thoughts and write them down actively versus typing, it's actually shown that writing and journaling can increase the efficacy of you trying to build these habits.
Mindset shift. Throughout the chapter, you emphasize the importance of a mindset in achieving financial goals. What strategies do you recommend for someone who struggles to shift their mindset from self-sabotage to a more empowering millionaire mindset?
Yeah. So I've been told that I am like the best loving bully that someone can have in their life, in the sense of that I'm going to be the friend that is not going to let you say that you can't do something if I really think that you can. And what I found from coaching a lot of people is that that self-sabotage is a way to cope with not wanting to make a significant change. And the truth is, financial freedom is probably the only thing that I can think of that is truly, really not free when it comes to the time and energy that you're going to have to spend, even though it has the word freedom in it. And if you really want to pursue financial freedom, you're going to have to make some changes. And where I found self sabotage with many of my clients is that they're purposefully not even realizing it, kind of stalling or stopping from doing the things that they really want to do because it will require a big shift, not only in their mindset, but again, in their habits. And habits are really hard to change. So one specific tip that I have in the book is, and I love that you're doing this, Mark, and why I was really excited to be in your podcast is, making it a habit at least once a month to be surrounded with other people who have millionaire mindsets, even if they're not millionaires. Because what I learned is that a lot of people, even if they are millionaires, sometimes don't have that mindset. They're still very focused on finances and they're not actually focused on living their lives. And where I think you can get a lot of benefit from being in parts of things like what you do is to surround yourself as a habit, make it a conscious effort once a month to get out of your own space and go into a space where there's other millionaire mindsets.
Yeah, I agree totally. Or what do people typically waste a lot of money on that when you think about it, it adds it up? It could be a pretty significant amount of money that could allow you to have that freedom to live in other countries and do other things.
I mean, my name is Bernadette Joy. I think it was by design. It's what I found is debt, which is why I focus so much on debt as part of this financial freedom plan. I have now been debt free, fully debt free, including, having paid off a mortgage since 2019. And in the last 5 years, my net worth has grown, 33%. And that would not have happened if I was still spending the vast majority of my income on paying that passive income to these institutions. So one of the biggest things that I have noticed with a lot of my clients is specifically, I would say in the US, student loans is a really big issue. I see people who are into their 40s and 50s and still carrying student loans from when they were in undergrad 20 years ago. And when we actually go in there and look at how much they paid in just interest, they are usually pretty shocked. And then, of course, the big thing right now is with credit cards. Specifically, I have seen a lot of people who, it's not that they were irresponsible with spending, it's that one emergency or one job loss got them to start carrying a balance when they never used to. And now the 23 to 30% interest is what's crushing their financial ability to move forward.
This goes along with what you're talking about. Financial independence number. The chapter outlines the concept of calculating a financial independence number using a 4% rule and the 25 times rule. How can readers assess their own expenses and adjust this calculation to cater to their unique financial situation and life goals? So you need to explain the 4% rule and the 25 times rule.
Okay, so this is a financial planning rule that is widely used in financial services, and it simply states that if you were to theoretically invest 25 times your annual expenses, so let's say your annual expenses is or let's say your monthly expenses, let's just make it even easier. Let's say your monthly expenses is $4,000 a month, then you would multiply that by 12 and you get about $48,000, and then times 25. That number, which is for most people will likely be in the US or in a lot of Western countries, will likely be in the millions of dollars. And basically, the thought is that if you were to invest that, not just save it or put it under your mattress, but actually invest it into investments that have a typical return that you would see in the stock market, if you were to withdraw 4% every year, you would theoretically not run out of money because it's invested, it will keep growing. And so what I found in this number is that there's two, and I talk about this in the book, there's usually two reactions to it. There's either people who are completely overwhelmed and say, that's impossible. This is crazy. There's no way that I can get $1 million of investments. And then there are people who say, okay, that sounds really hard, but at least now I know. At least I now I have a goal versus what most people have as their financial goal is just to make as much money as possible with no end in sight. And what I found that to your question of how can people specifically address their own expenses and adjust this calculation is there's two ways. One is you start to realize that there's no way that you're going to get to that number just by trading your time for dollars. So you're going to have to figure out ways to invest or to build other streams of income to grow your investments and to start learning how to invest a little more wisely. But the easier side of the equation is what I did, which was try to minimize my expenses as much as possible so that number would go down. And one of the biggest reasons that I decided to pay off my home was that I realized at the time, if I had a $2,500 mortgage every month, if I didn't have that mortgage payment anymore, that number would actually get down by potentially, tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how much you're paying in debt. And so the easiest thing that I tell people to do is before you go and try to find other streams of income, see where you can streamline your expenses first. And that's a way to lower that number and make it less overwhelming.
Did you spend any money on fun? Like, it sounds to me, paying off all this debt, that you weren't able to really do anything.
That is always the assumption, and I love when people say that. And when most people meet my husband and I, they actually find out that they're pretty surprised that we're pretty fun and we spend a lot of money now on things that most people find frivolous. I would say for the time that we spent, which was about 3 years, to pay off all of our debt, including our mortgage, we paid off $300,000 of debt in 3 years. Was it worth the trade-off of now being financially free for the next 60 years of my life? Yes. And even during that time, we did have quite a bit of fun. And what I found was that, and I think this is what I talk about in the Heal Your Money Wounds, a lot of the fun, and I would say, especially in the US, is really revolved around self soothing or around things that aren't actually really fun for me. So, i.e., I don't drink. So I save a lot of money on alcohol. My
I'm
husband and
with
I,
you, same.
yeah. If you see back here, there's a board game here. My husband and I are obsessed with board games. It's not an expensive hobby. And what was funny for me was that at first when I was paying down the debt, I was thinking, oh my gosh, are my husband and I losers? Like we just invite people over for board game nights and we have potlucks and we don't go out and eat at fancy restaurants. And when I started posting about our board games and how we were saving money in order to pay down our debt, all of the people that I thought were going to make fun of us were the ones who were like, how come you don't invite us to your board games? That looks like so much fun.
Yeah, I can see that, and that is a good way. And if you don't drink, that saves you a fortune. Uh,
Mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
I don't either. Dealing with overwhelm, you acknowledge that feelings of overwhelm can hinder progress. What are some specific techniques or practices you suggest for managing being overwhelmed when starting on the path to financial independence, especially for beginners who think it's too daunting a task?
Yeah. So budgeting is something you'll hear very often, but the way that I actually teach people how to budget is quite fun. And the simplest thing that I ask people to start off with is to, in the book, the C, CRUSH stands for the 5 steps that I walk people through in terms of their finances. And the C stands for curating your accounts. And how I make this fun is that rather than just calling your checking account a checking account and your savings account a savings account and your emergency fund an emergency fund, is coming up with specific names to these accounts that actually mean something to you, that actually feel like they're motivating and get you to feel that they're aligned with your goals. So for example, true story, because now that I know that I have a new friend in Asia, is my travel fund is no longer called travel fund. It's called Babe in Bali. And that's my vision for myself next year is I want to I want to be in my best shape and be hanging out in Bali. And that to me is a lot more motivating than just saying this is my travel fund or my emergency fund. So I think that's a good place for people to start if you're just starting out.
In chapter 2, personal experience with mistakes, you provide your own example of personal mistake regarding dental hygiene. How can you share an additional financial mistake that significantly impacted your life and what you learned from it?
So while we're on the topic of drinking, I actually I actually tried to calculate how much I might have spent on tequila in my early 20s, when I was on spring breaks or hanging out with people in New York City, or when I was working in big banking and like I was kind of forced to go to happy hours with my colleagues and stuff. And my very conservative estimate was probably in the tens of thousands of dollars. And then if you do the personal finance expert thing that every expert does, it says, well, if you had invested that money instead and let it grow in the stock market, it could have been this much money. So I now think that that tequila that I used to buy rounds of shots for, for people who I don't even hang out with anymore, that could have been an extra year of freedom, or it could have been an extra vacation, or it could have just been, uh, you know, money that I put towards my health instead. I really cannot express this enough. The vast majority of people that I coach, a lot of their financial choices are based off of trying to impress other people or trying to look like they're somebody that they're really not aligned with. And so the biggest mistake that I have made is trying to be someone who I'm not, and actually trying to spend money to make people think that I was that person. And so anyone who's listening to this, I want to really encourage you to, if you're a nerd, like be your nerdy self. And if someone has to drink with you in order to be your friend, they're probably not really your friend, and you can save that money and do some other things with your life. That would be a lot more rewarding.
I can't agree more with that. Prioritizing your financial goals. You emphasize the importance of prioritizing financial goals instead of juggling multiple ones. What specific strategies do you recommend for someone struggling to identify and prioritize their financial goals effectively?
Yes. The biggest thing that I have seen most recently is this constant battle between investing and paying down debt. And there's different opinions to this. And I've always kind of been at odds with traditional financial planning that says, oh, you should, pay down your debt and also invest. And what I'm finding in coaching people, specifically in their 50s, is that they did exactly that. And now they are overwhelmed and they cannot seem to figure out how to get out of the debt that they've been carrying for potentially decades. So my philosophy to anyone who is especially feeling overwhelmed with their finances is focus on one goal at a time. And if you have any debt, to focus on that one first, even if that means you need to pause your investing right now. And I specifically use the word pause versus saying stopping investing, because even for myself, in order to pay off the $72,000 of student loans, I had to make the conscious choice to pause my 401k. In the US, we have retirement plans called 401ks. And I purposefully decided to pause my retirement investing so that I could pay down that debt. And the real thing that I want people to learn is that debt is supposed to be and should be considered a short-term solution. So if you have a medical emergency, or if you have, a specific expense that you have to pay for, and the only way you can get it is finance debt, that makes sense. I'm not shaming people for having debt, but using debt as a long-term strategy versus, trying to minimize your debts and then focus on investing after you pay down your debt, to me, makes a really big difference in people feeling less overwhelmed and being able to prioritize more effectively.
Well, what do you think about when financial planners tell people don't pay off your mortgage? And I want to pay off my mortgage as soon as I can. And so I had taken short-term loans, that type of thing. Well, what's your thoughts on that?
I hate it. Um, because I've generally found that when financial advisors or planners say to do that, they've never asked the question, well, what would it mean for you if your mortgage was paid off? And most financial planners and advisors are not trained psychologists, and not and haven't studied kind of mental health. And for me personally, I chose to, and I talk about this in the book, I chose to pay off my mortgage early because my parents, again, first generation Filipino American, my parents were forced to leave their house, the one that I grew up in, because they couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. And they had spent this money elsewhere. And so I have kind of this like deep seated uh fear, which is based in the reality of what my family went through, of someone can take away your house. And so I decided for myself, yeah, you know what, it might not be the most like financially optimized decision in terms of like, oh well, if the stock market is making this much and your mortgage rate is only this much, which is always what they say, but for me, I actually found that paying down the mortgage gave me peace of mind that I could go take bigger risks elsewhere. And I don't think it was by accident that in 2019, I became a completely debt free, including my mortgage. And then in 2020 is when I was able to launch my business in the middle of a global pandemic and still be successful because I didn't have to worry about the roof over my head.
I agree with my dad went bankrupt, and I'm always afraid I'm going to end up out in the street. So I've always been a good saver, but not stopping myself from travel and so forth. That's where I spend my money is travel, not junk, but on
Me too.
travel. Yeah, so I agree with you totally about that. Um, are there books that you started reading when you got started that help people think about these things?
Yes, one of my favorite books. Oh, now I'm forgetting the name of it. It's one of Tony Robbins' books. I think it was exciting for me yesterday when someone sent me the picture of the book in the Philippines. It was next to Tony Robbins' book on the bookshelf, and
Oh,
I was like,
cool.
"Oh, that's so cool!" And now I'm forgetting the name of it, but if you look up Tony Robbins and his latest money book, that is the name. And uh, the reason that I read that book 3 times, and I read it because it just was very, it was, I think I have a similar style to him in that I'm just very to the point, and I didn't like that. I like that there was not a lot of fluff. But the biggest thing that I always remember, and I tell other people about that book was uh the thought of kind of risk versus reward, and how really people who become wealthy are not just they're not huge risk takers. They are people who take very calculated risk. And ever since I've read that book, I always think about, all right, as someone who's a risk averse person, if I want to become wealthy, I'm going to have to take some risk, but that doesn't mean that I'm just taking risk blindly, or like I'm gambling money away. If I actually do my due diligence and I do my research and I make a plan for it, it's not as risky as it might be for someone else who's just throwing money at an investment, for example.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about that. I think that people who have been taking these unnecessary risks without really most people who make a lot of money are risk adverse, right? They're
Hmm.
calculated risk takers. They just don't take a pair of dice and throw them down and see what comes up. They really think all this through. You talk about imposter syndrome. You discuss the fear responses that can hinder financial decision making. What practical steps do you suggest for someone dealing with imposter syndrome, especially when asking for what they believe they deserve in terms of pay or career advancement?
So I'm going to use one of my clients as an example. She's been with me for 4 years, and she knows who she is if she listens to this podcast. But I would say she is addicted to motivation and affirmations. And what I mean by that is a lot of people, and as a psychology degree, again, having a psychology degree, I understand that having a positive mindset is important and affirmations are great, but affirmations and just waiting to be motivated is not the same as actually going and doing something. And so when people ask me how I was able to get over imposter syndrome, the biggest thing I've told people, which sounds so obvious, is you have to prove to yourself that you can do it. Otherwise, you're just playing this thing over and over in your head versus actually showing the results. And the best way that I've been able to get over imposter syndrome is actually having the receipts, the actual tangible results that I was able to accomplish something. So a big thing that I had imposter syndrome about was this book. I said over and over again, I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer. I don't know why anyone would buy this book. And I had a client actually come to me and she said, but you help me with my marketing writing all the time, and you've written articles in Forbes, and you have taken your podcasts and turned them into written things for your clients. You are a writer. And the best way that I was able to figure out how to get past the imposter syndrome of writing the book was sitting down and writing the book.
The chapter to emphasize is reducing the number of financial accounts to 20 or fewer. That sounds like a lot of accounts to me, 20 or fewer.
Mhm.
What practical advice would you offer to someone who feels overwhelmed by the process of consolidating multiple accounts, especially if they've already established a long history with them? Talk about what you mean
Yes.
by that.
Yeah, so I specifically said 20 accounts. And actually, I agree with you. 20 accounts is a lot. I think most people can get down to like 10 accounts. You just need a checking account, a savings account, and you might need another account for your travel funds and stuff. On the credit card side, I don't think anyone needs more than two credit cards in the world. And then you look at all of your debts, whether it's your mortgage and your car payments and all that stuff, where I actually am a bit cluttered, quote unquote, in my accounts is in my investments. And that's specifically because my husband and I, we each have a 401k. We each have an IRA, both traditional and a Roth in the US. And we have a brokerage account. And then we also have another account for real estate. So the most accounts that I have is on the investment side, but everything else is very streamlined. And the quickest thing I can tell people to do is to get into a tool. In the US, I recommend a tool called Monarch Money. I know it works in other countries as well, but I'm not sure about every other country. But there are plenty of tools where you can just pull all of your accounts into one view to really see what you have. And so it's kind of like Marie Kondo, where the way that I like to declutter is that for example, in my closet, instead of just trying to pull things out of the closet, I have to take every piece of clothing that I have and put it on my bed and see everything that I own. And you realize how much you really have. It's kind of the same thing with your accounts, is to pull everything into one place and then see if any of these accounts are no longer serving a purpose. If your purpose for it is just because, or because I got a bonus from it before, or because it's just, annoying to close, then take some time, especially in this new year for the first 3 months. Some of my clients take 3 months to curate those accounts. And if you can get down to just the ones that you absolutely need, it is 10 times easier to organize your finances and know what you're actually spending and how to invest if you have the minimal amount of counts.
I like this one because I've helped my own clients put together financial models on just managing their own money. Usually I'm doing them for their companies, but
Mm-hmm.
I've done it for their personal, and they're shocked at how much they spend on insurance. I had one that was spending, and they were in their mid 60s, spending 3,000 a month on life insurance when their kids were fully grown. So the annual insurance audit is highlighted as an important financial habit. What should someone do if they discover their current insurance premiums are too high but feel uncertain about how to negotiate for lower fees, or what steps to take next? Or even should they just get rid of like life insurance and things like that?
Yes. So just because you mentioned life insurance specifically, I have helped so many clients get out of life insurance policies that they didn't need because they were sold by someone who said they were a financial advisor who was not acting as a fiduciary, and told that it was an investment when in fact it is not an investment. And especially for clients who had significant debt or not being able to even to pay their regular bills and living paycheck to paycheck, there is zero reason to be having life insurance at that point. I noticed specifically that minorities have been targeted a lot for, especially whole life insurance, because they're kind of playing on this fear of like, well, what happens if to your kids if something happens to you? But what I think is so interesting is I have met at least half a dozen single women who have life insurance policies, and I was like, who are you insuring? You don't have kids. You don't have a spouse. Like, who are you insuring? And they said, oh, but the person told me it was an investment. And that's like where I talk about in the book. Definitely check your life insurance policies to see if that's actually what you really need. And if you were sold it was an investment, it really is not for most people. That aside, the best thing that you can do is just go get quotes. So in the book, I talk about the annual audit, and once a year, I know it's not doesn't sound fun or exciting at all, but to review all of your different health insurance and other types of property insurance to see where they're at, what the expirations of them are, if you need to renew any of them, but also once a year, just go and get some quotes. So, as an example for myself, my husband and I did not realize that I was overpaying for my homeowner's insurance back when I did own a home. And I figured out that I was overpaying because when I bought a second home at the time, I was able to pay the same amount of money for two. two homes instead of one, which meant that I was paying a lot for that first one. So the easiest thing that you can do if you're feeling overwhelmed is that you don't have to negotiate anything right now. Just go and get quotes from at least two other providers against your current ones. And then the easiest thing you can do to your current provider is say, well, I did get in fact get a lower rate here. What would you like to offer me for me to keep your business? And as someone who's worked in the insurance industry is one of those places that is a very fixed pie. As in, like, there's only so many customers out there. There's not a lot of like new customers out there in the world. And so they're going to do their best to keep your business.
It's funny you should say that, that there are so few new customers. Is that because the percentage of people that would actually spend the money doesn't really grow exponentially, even though there's a sizable number of people?
That, and also, like, so for example, like, car insurance would be a good example. Like, everyone who needs car insurance probably has it. So the only way
Right.
they're going to get a new customer is if someone gets a new car, right? And what has been really interesting that I have had to navigate with some of my clients is that some of them have been saying, oh my gosh, like, I don't understand. My car insurance just went up by a couple $100s, and I don't even drive that much. Why is it going up? And a lot of people don't understand the insurance rate that you're getting charged has nothing to do with your current driving status. It's based off of like the years prior on how they have paid out in the past. And so if they paid out a lot more in the past, then that's going to affect your rate in the future. So it's always good every year to go and get those quotes and renegotiate those rates.
I'm actually getting rid of my car when I come back to the States because I'm paying for a car just sitting there, and I'm paying for car insurance. So I figure I'll take that same amount of money and just invest it back in, or set up a separate account that when I need to rent a car, I have an account just to rent the car.
That's exactly right. And that's a great example of a swap. My husband and I did the same thing. We live in North Carolina, which is not really great for public transportation. And so most people are shocked that we have one car instead of two and we share it. Whereas every other couple that we know each have their own individual cars. And we did it as a temporary swap when we were paying down our debt over 8 years ago. And we've just never gone back to getting two cars because when you add in the cost of insurance and gas and all of those other and maintenance for it, we took that money elsewhere. And like you, we love to go travel instead.
Yeah, I mean, you're still going to make these financial mistakes, but you can keep reducing them down for sure. The concept of cash flow cushion is presented as a key strategy for escaping paycheck to paycheck living. Can you share any practical strategies for someone who struggles to build this cushion, especially if they're currently managing a tight budget?
Yes, this is the biggest thing that has been new to my philosophy because in the book, I refer to my Crush Boot Camp, which are all of the people who've gone through my programs. And they're the ones who actually inspired what I call the cash flow cushion, because I teach people how to do zero-based budgeting, meaning that you take all the money that you think you're going to earn at the beginning of the month, and then you zero it out until every dollar is spent versus having leftover money. And what I found is that a lot of people really struggle with that mentality because they were literally living paycheck to paycheck. They're waiting for the next paycheck in order to pay their bills versus being on time or even ahead. So the cash flow cushion, unlike the emergency fund that most people talk about, it is 1 month's worth of your expenses, your most basic expenses, sitting inside the checking account that you pay your regular bills out of, so that you're literally not waiting for your next paycheck in order for your bills to get paid. So for most people, it's going to be 5 things. And this is where people can get overwhelmed. So even if you're in a tight budget, what you can do is you can at least calculate what that number is. So what does it cost for your housing, which in Vietnam, I just learned from you that it is so much cheaper what we're paying here. So your housing, your utilities, your food expenses, your transportation, and your health expenses. So those are 5 basic expenses. If you add that total up, then your goal is to, even if it's a couple of bucks every week or so, is to start building that cushion in your checking account so that your bills can start running automatically and you're not waiting for that next paycheck to arrive.
Um, do you still feel people should buy homes, or is it better to rent? I've heard financial planners say you're better off renting.
Right now I'm a renter. I've been renting for 3 years. I just posted on my Instagram that it's my third Christmas as a renter, and I've had so much more freedom to be able to go and travel and go do the things that I want to do. I would say, it, I actually wrote an article about this in Forbes where if you're looking to live in kind of the 50 major metro areas in the US, it's actually cheaper to rent than it is to buy. And what I found personally for myself, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, is that I can actually afford to buy a home in cash right now. And I have no desire to do that because I looked around. I definitely still stay on top of the real estate game here. But when I look around, what I would have to give up in terms of the convenience day to day and the amenities and the peace of mind, knowing that okay, I don't have to worry about the roof leaking or the yard or any of that stuff. It to me is really not worth that trade off. But I will say, for some people, my in laws, for example, they just bought a new home in South Carolina, and it was really important for them to feel like they had a specific place that they were rooted in, that this would really truly be their forever home, retirement home. So I really think it depends on where you are in your lifestyle. So for me, who I'm younger and I'm wanting to travel and like want to be more mobile, might not make sense for me. But for my in-laws, it totally makes sense for them to buy it. But I did make sure that they're going to pay off that home in full.
So let me go to a question from the audience, and I should have asked this earlier. Um, you recommend to hang out with people who have a millionaire mindset. What do you mean by millionaire mindset? What is that?
So the way that I have been able to really diagnose whether or not someone, I think it is a diagnosis, has a millionaire mindset is simply around how they react to the idea of themselves being a millionaire or other people being a millionaire. So I'll give you kind of a prime example. Since I'm in book promotion time, I book reviews and stuff are new to me. So Mark, maybe you'll mentor me on this. I got one of the reviews. The only like bad review I've gotten so far was basically saying, in the book she just talks about being a millionaire a lot, and it's full of platitudes, and basically they didn't like the book. And I was like, you know what? That's okay. That is okay. This book was written for people who want to and believe it's possible for them to become millionaires. Usually the people who believe that don't get offended by other people being millionaires. And so when I say that to whoever asked this question is the best way that you can attract other people with millionaire mindsets is for you to say, okay, well, do I believe it's possible for me? Do I act in that manner? Do I behave in a way that shows that I really care about what my finances look like? And chances are you'll be attracting more people like that versus attracting people with a scarcity mindset of just like, well, that's not for me, and you seem like you're bragging, or I have this background that makes it impossible for me. That may be true for them, but that doesn't have to be true for you.
I have to tell you, I grew up with a friend of mine that he had a master's degree, making $200,000 a year, actually $250,000 a year. And his wife had a degree, and they even inherited her aunt's home, nice home. And within 5 years, they had way more debt than they had assets. Like
Mhm.
they had 5 cars, but only 2 of them driving. Then when they would go to Disney, they would buy all the kids all the crap that they wanted. And I noticed how quickly they went through money, that when they went out for dinner, they'd have drinks and they'd have appetizers and everything else. Is that kind of typical of people that kind of just blow through the money, that they might make really good money, but they literally have no discipline or don't think anything, that they're living for the moment, but realizing that they're not living for the future?
I will say that I was pretty surprised. I looked at the statistics of like what amount of U.S. households make about around that money, 200K or more, and it was about a third, which was higher
Uh-huh.
than I thought for whatever reason. And I don't know that it's a lack of discipline. What I realize is that it's a lack of vision. And when I say that, I mean that their vision of what a rich lifestyle is will be all those things. It will be the material goods and the house and the cars and the expensive dinners. But I have coached enough people who make good money who do not have a healthy marriage or a healthy relationship, who don't ever see their kids, who are working all the time. And so when I talk about millionaire mindset, it's not just about having $1 million in the bank. Millionaire mindset is actually understanding that money is a tool to actually live a rich life. And to me, a rich life is health and relationships. And so even if you have, I mean, I'm sure we can all point to certain billionaires that we know that don't seem like the people that we want to be around. Millionaire mindset is being able to use your finances to get towards the things that actually really matter in life, which to me is having a healthy body, having a healthy mind, and having healthy relationships.
Another question from the audience. The buying power of $1 or any major currency has declined massively over the last 10 years. With the cost of living on the rise, what practical advice you have for budgeting and saving?
I love this question so much. Thank you for asking that question. Uh, Here is the truth that we don't want to face is that the cost of living is not going to go down. It's only going to keep going.
Always has.
Right. Always has. That is just the reality of it. Like, show me a time in history where, like, the cost of living has just dropped dramatically. It's just not going to happen. And so, knowing that that is really the case, is that the cost of living is going to keep going up, then the only thing that is really within your control is choosing how you spend, which can be as simple as, okay, well, the cost of, for example, the cost of like meat and eggs has gone up way more than the cost of like vegetables. So maybe I eat more vegetables and I eat less things that are high in cholesterol, as an example. But on the more complicated spectrum of this is that the best way that I know to beat inflation and cost of living is to make sure that my income producing abilities outpace whatever the cost of living is. So yeah, cost of living, for example, when I first bought my home in 2013, it was 200, I bought it for $235,000. I just looked in my old neighborhood, similar home just went for 700K, right? Here's the crazy thing is if I really wanted to, I could go back to my same neighborhood and buy that house in cash. So yes, cost of living has gone up. Yes, housing has gone up. Currencies have gone down, but you still have a lot of control over what you choose to spend your time and energy on and how you can grow your wealth and your income to be able to outpace the cost of living rise.
In chapter 6, you explained that pursuing financial independence often involves a different approach to asset allocation compared to traditional frameworks. What specific considerations or adjustments should individuals make to their investments if they're aiming for an aggressive savings rate up to 70% of their income?
Yes, yes. So I have been at steady for about 50% savings rate for the last 4 years. And the best way that I was able to do that was specifically to focus on those 5 expenses that I mentioned earlier, right? So your 5 basic expenses is everyone has to pay for housing of some sort. Everyone has to pay for transportation, for food, for health expenses, and for utilities. So I tackled the housing one, as we mentioned before, with paying off my mortgage at one point, and now I also rent in a place where it is way below the means of what I would have been approved of in terms of rent. So looking at your housing expenses, absolutely. Food in the US, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mark. Like, people spend way too much money on food that is actually like not even nourishing us. And in the book I talk about how actually buying in bulk sometimes might not be in your favor because you're buying all of this stuff that you normally wouldn't buy in such big quantities. So looking at food is such a big thing. But the area that I think people need to spend a lot more time on and really reassessing, especially in 2025, is around their health expenses. And I'm actually telling people that you need to spend more money in health. So as a financial coach, you would think that my MO would be to cut all of your expenses wherever you can. And what I'm asking people to do specifically is to swap instead of sacrifice, think of the word swap. Instead of spending in Mark's example, instead of spending that money on the car insurance, he might use that money to buy like better supplements or hire a personal trainer or do something that is actually going to increase his energy level and actually make him a healthier person. And I say that specifically for people who want to have a savings rate of like a high savings rate, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're cutting all the expenses everywhere. You're swapping the expenses that will actually help you be on this game in the long run. And the best way that I know to be on this game financially in the long run is to get good sleep, eat good food, and exercise regularly.
Yeah, your health is probably the most important thing you have to guard against, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that could be the biggest crusher on many levels, from not being able to earn income to having the outflow. I mean, like, as much as you and your husband have saved, one catastrophic event that you may have been able to avoid could wipe that savings out in a very short period of time.
That's exactly right. And, I'm very compelled, and this is why my husband and I have been looking at moving abroad, is, we can have an entire other conversation about the healthcare system in the US, but I've had a pre-existing condition for my entire life that I am currently on a medication that if I did not have health insurance, it would cost $2,000 a month. And so I had the bright idea in the last couple of weeks is to say, you know what, I'm going to hire a health coach and I'm going to work on some of my diet and some of the things that like lifestyle changes that I need to make to reduce the symptoms of this health condition that I have, so that, to your point, that I'm not, hopefully not having to rely on this medication for the rest of my life, but also that it improves my chances at not having a catastrophic like health event.
Isn't it kind of unbelievable that when President Trump gets back in, he wants to raise the debt ceiling and borrow more money when the US up until the early 70s was debt free and we were the lender. And now,
Mhm.
our debt is, I guess, 18 trillion, some ridiculously astronomical number that I guess could be paid down over time and we could be debt free again as a country. Um,
Mhm.
what do you think of that as an impact on the rest of us, this increased amount of debt?
Mm.
I mean, would you
I love
apply
it.
your own standards to the government?
Yes. I mean, here's what I think is super interesting is that it goes against what I said earlier in this podcast, which is debt to me should be a short-term solution, not a long-term lifestyle. And this is maybe controversial to say, but I think that, what I've noticed is that people, whether it's government officials or business owners or just regular everyday people, when you use debt as a first resort and not a last resort, you become a lot less resourceful. And so, what I mean by that is, like, even for myself in my own personal finances and then in my business, I have been able to run all of my businesses completely debt free. And that has forced a level of creativity and a level of problem solving that I would not have exercised if I just was like, oh, let me just take out a loan to fix this problem. And so I think it is very interesting, but not off brand, that the government is heavily reliant on this, like on debt to run our government. And so then of course the average American thinks, well, it's normal for me to have, the average right now is over $100,000 of debt across all the different types of debt that people have. But unless you live otherwise and realize what it's like on the other side, which is why I share so much of my story and why I wrote this book, is that most people don't know someone who has been completely debt free and has continued to stay debt free and also be happy and also be healthy and also, you know, run a successful business. And so there's actually a lot more people, not just me, who are doing that. And so I think it is really important for people to expose themselves to different philosophies of like, well, what could life look like if I were debt free or even had less debt? Um, but I hate to say that's also, one of the reasons that I'm looking to move abroad is that, I think that for us to have this amount of debt and still not have universal health care here in the US is like appalling to me.
I think it's scary on Forbes site right now, and says more than 1 in 4 Americans have savings below $1,000.
That's right.
$1,000. a quarter of the people.
That's right. And I got a funny comment on my social media one day that was someone, just again, not a millionaire mindset, who just said, your content is unrelatable for the average person. And I said, absolutely right, because nobody here is trying to be average. I am not trying to be the average person, because the average person is in debt, is unhealthy, is relying on, other circumstances to kind of solve their issues. And what I really hope that people take away from this conversation and from the book is that you actually have a lot more power than you have given yourself credit for. And it starts with these small habits to take control, not just of your financial future, but to be able to live in the present and enjoy your life.
Yeah, I was surprised as I'm looking at this chart that only 17% of baby boomers have $500,000 or more. And I think a good chunk of that is their homes.
That's correct.
Um,
That's absolutely correct. And I found that anecdotally, my client base, it leans heavily towards people who are 40 plus. And I mean, obviously they're coming to me for coaching, so that's somewhat skewed in terms of what type of person, what type of finances that I see. But yeah, most people will not and do not have enough money to retire comfortably in the US.
no, I mean, I don't think I could either. I mean, find that if you're thinking about the long term, not just not just retiring for 5 years or 10 years, but thinking about 20, 30 years,
Mhm.
US is a super, super expensive place to be. Because if you have $1
Mhm.
million in Asia, you're done. I mean,
Yeah.
most countries, you can live off of that, no problem, because you can live off of about, oh, $25,000 a year and live a middle class life here.
Mhm, mhm, and what I think is really exciting about having this conversation with you is the fact that I think it was, destiny that we were supposed to have this conversation today, because right after this call, my husband and I are going back to our budget and planning our travel budget for next year. And we're very much looking forward to learning more about, what other countries have to offer, and more people, especially after the last election, have approached me and said, "Hey, I want my financial plan to include at least some portion of my future, either retirement or even the next couple of years, to be more abroad and not just here in the U.S."
Yeah, you address the gender wealth gap in the workplace and broader implications on financial independence. What actionable strategies can women implement to negotiate for higher pay and prioritize building their net worth in a way that actively counters these disparities? And by the way, for the first time in history, this was just announced, I guess, a month or two ago. Women now have more assets than men.
Hmm. Hmm.
This just
So,
happened for the first time in history.
Uh, well, what I would say in terms of in relation to the book is the reason I put negotiation as one of the 25 habits is because most people don't negotiate as a habit. They negotiate out of like desperation or
Yep.
necessity, and they don't actually do it proactively. And then they wait until they have to do it, and then you're forced into a corner, which any negotiation expert will tell you, like, that's the worst worst time to be negotiating. And so making it a habit to negotiate your rates every year, whether you're an entrepreneur, a regular kind of like 9 to 5 type of person, or a freelancer, every year reviewing what you're getting paid and coming up with a case study on why you should be paid more. And especially if you're a person of color or a woman, chances are you are underpaid anyway. And so, one of the simplest strategies that I talk about in the book is to use a specific number and not a round number. And I found that to be really effective as a former recruiter. Is whenever we had to do salary adjustments for people, we always did it by percentages. And so sometimes people's numbers would be kind of wacky, right? Like someone's salary would be like $45,433. And what I found is that instead of just saying, "Oh, I think I deserve 5K more or 10K more," actually tying what you are asking for with a specific number, versus just saying like a round number, forces your hand to do a little bit more research as to why you're asking for that number. But it also signals to the person that you're negotiating with that you, in fact, know what you're talking about, and that you're not just pulling a number out of your butt.
Yeah. Here's my last question for you.
Okay.
How can individuals effectively navigate and communicate about money with family members who may have a different attitude or beliefs about finances, especially when these beliefs are rooted in cultural or generational differences?
Ah, so one of the other habits I talk about in the book that is very close to my heart, especially as a first generation Filipino American, is nobody likes to talk about death. Nobody likes to talk about money. And so putting money and death together is like the worst conversation to be asking people to do. And so, what I encourage everyone to do is that, especially if you are a sandwich generation, meaning that you're taking care of kids and also taking care of aging parents, or if you are someone like me who doesn't have kids, but people assume that you don't have any responsibilities, but are helping with taking care of aging parents, is to have those conversations early. And specifically, the best thing you can do for yourself is have your own estate plan. No matter how old you are, no matter how healthy you are, everyone should have their own estate plan, and that puts you in a better position to have those conversations with other people that you may need to have that conversation with, because you've done the work yourself. You're walking the walk, so you're not just talking the talk.
I have to say this hour went way too fast. I could spend a couple more hours just talking to you. And I loved your answers. They were short, concise, but substantive.
Thank
Bernadette,
you.
thank you. You're the perfect way to end the year here, talking about these issues. So people go into 2025, hard to believe 2025, and a more control of their financial and personal future. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.